All right, and my clock is now saying 4:01, so we will go ahead and get started while some other people join us. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the Technology Happy Hour. My name is Sarah Salkup Jones. I am a Research and Heavy Duty Vehicle Program Manager and Chief Equity Officer here at Virginia Clean Cities. We have a very packed presentation today. Hydrogen is a new and exciting technology, and so as we normally would encourage people to ask questions during the presentation, today I'm going to ask that people go ahead and utilize the chat function, put them in as we go, and I will collect them to ask Geo at the end of his presentation. So please utilize that chat function. We have a lot to tackle today. We also normally go around and have like a round of introductions, but since we have so much material to cover, if you guys are willing and able to, please put who you are and who you're with in the chat today. So, and feel free to use that as sort of a place for networking and connections. Since we have so much info to cover, Gio, I'm going to go ahead and just hand it straight over to you. If you want to give us a couple sentence introduction to yourself, and then we can get right into that presentation.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. My name is Geovanni Castano. I work with Dominion Energy's corporate innovation team. And we have been, or our team, what it does is look into emerging technologies and try to understand how they could help Dominion and our customers to decarbonize and improve the operation so we can provide reliable and affordable energy for everyone here. And today we are going to talk about hydrogen. So if you go to the next slide, please. So as many of you might be familiar with Dominion, we have a decarbonization goal to become net zero by 2050. To achieve that, we are currently working hard on deploying technologies that are already ready to be deployed, such as renewables and renewable natural gas, but we're still investing in emerging technologies that can help us achieve these goals. That includes hydrogen, advanced nuclear storage, and carbon capture. Next slide, please. So, like I mentioned before, excuse me, we are looking at different technologies, and hydrogen is one of those. And what we're doing right now is trying to understand how hydrogen can help us and our customers decarbonize our operations, so we can achieve the net zero goals that both the company and different stakeholders in the state have in mind. Next slide. So what is hydrogen? Hydrogen is the most common and abundant element in Earth. As a fun fact, 10% of the human body is made of hydrogen. So it's everywhere, but it's not in its pure form. It's always attached to any other element like water, methane, or hydrocarbons in general. Hydrogen has been used mainly as a feedstock, but now it's getting a lot of attention as an energy carrier because it can help us decarbonize sectors like industrial and transportation that are hard to decarbonize, and provides a potential pathway to achieve a low emission operations at an affordable price. Next slide. Like I said before, hydrogen has been used mainly as a feedstock in steel production, ammonia production, and refineries to crack hydrocarbons. But when you look at hydrogen as an energy carrier, it has a lot of applications. Especially, like I said before, it has an important role in decarbonizing those hard to decarbonize sectors like industrial applications, steel, cement, glass, ammonia production, transportation, mainly heavy duty vehicles, power generation, and also for heating purposes in buildings. Next slide. Currently, the US produces about 10 million metric tons of hydrogen per year. Most of it is produced using natural gas reformation, which consists in cracking natural gas into carbon and hydrogen. Most of the utilization right now is for as a feedstock for petroleum refineries in the Gulf of Mexico mainly, ammonia production, and methanol. There are some energy uses that are coming up, mainly transportation, and that are start to gain some traction and demand in the market. But right now, it's mainly a feedstock utilization. Next slide. When you think about hydrogen as an energy carrier, there are two things to consider. One is the energy content by mass, right? So 1 kilogram of hydrogen has about the same energy content as 1 gallon of diesel. So by weight, hydrogen has a lot of energy content in it. But because it's a gas and it's just a tiny gas molecule, to store it requires a lot of volume. So when you think about energy content by volume, it's about 4 times less compared to diesel or natural gas, diesel or gasoline. So there is some trade-offs that need to be evaluated when thinking about hydrogen and the utilization. Next slide. Now, I want to show you guys the value chain for hydrogen because, like I said before, hydrogen does not exist in its pure form in the atmosphere. So we need to produce it from something, right? We need to extract it from some feedstock. So for the value chain, we need to consider production of hydrogen, how we move it to the end users, and the potential applications that we can find in the energy or the economy overall. So for production, we will need a feedstock, maybe natural gas, maybe water, or any other, and an energy input to extract that hydrogen from that component. Then we will need to move it either via pipelines or trucks, and then we can use for as an energy carrier, like I mentioned before, in power generation, industrial applications, and transportation. Now we'll be focused mainly on energy utilization, since hydrogen use as a feedstock is already in place, and the energy applications are the ones that are growing in importance in the US and the world. Next slide. To produce hydrogen, there are two main feedstocks right now that are at a commercial level. The main one is using natural gas reformation. This is known as steam methane reforming. It uses natural gas and steam to crack methane into carbon and hydrogen. The carbon, when it's separated from the methane, is combined with the oxygen and produces CO2. This is the most common production pathway right now in the US and probably in the world, and it has carbon emissions associated with it. So if we wanted to decarbonize steam methane reforming, we will need to include carbon capture and sequestration. What this will do is the CO2 that is coming out of the process will be stripped out of the flue gas, and then we will have to store it underground so it never reaches the atmosphere. And that will become a clean hydrogen production pathway. And this is known as blue hydrogen. There is another technology that is emerging to use natural gas for hydrogen production that is known as methane pyrolysis. In this case, we use heat and catalyst to separate methane into carbon solid and hydrogen. So in this case, carbon is not reacting with oxygen, but is becoming a kind of char that is solid and can be transported for either end use in asphalt or concrete or other industrial processes, or just in landfill. This is a clean production pathway if the heat is produced with clean energy, either renewables or renewable natural gas, for example. Then we have electrolysis, which consists in splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen. Intrinsically, this doesn't have any carbon emissions associated with the process, but because it uses power to split the water molecule into hydrogen and oxygen, the power production needs to be clean, meaning renewables or nuclear, to actually have a clean hydrogen production system. Otherwise, the carbon associated with the electricity production will count towards the carbon intensity of the hydrogen. And finally, hydrogen can be produced as a byproduct, mainly in the chloralkali industry, where they split hydrogen and chlorine from chlorine acid to produce chlorine products. And then hydrogen is just a byproduct that is not usually used for any purposes, and it's just vented to the atmosphere. Next slide. Here you can see the cost of hydrogen right now and the projections in terms of how much cheaper it can become. So you can see gray hydrogen, which is steam methane reforming, is the cheapest and most widely used system right now. And it is expected to increase its cost once regulations are passed to account for the carbon emissions associated with it. If you attach to the carbon capture system and you store that CO2 underground, you can see in the blue and dark blue area, that is a lot more expensive. But as this technology continue to develop and be integrated in existing and new plants, it is expected that the cost will reduce too. And then the light blue, which is electrolysis, is a lot more expensive right now, mainly because of the cost of manufacturing of electrolyzers and the cost of electricity. But as manufacturing achieves scale and their bigger plants producing a lot more electrolyzers, it could be expected the cost associated with capex of the electrolyzer will reduce, and that will impact positively the cost of hydrogen. Next slide. This is a cool graphic because it shows cost of hydrogen in the US. So you can see cost of hydrogen in the y-axis on the left side, and on the right side you can see the carbon emissions associated with the process. So if you go to the cheapest production pathway, which is symmetry reforming, you can see it's about $1.3 per kilogram of hydrogen, but it has the highest carbon emissions associated with it. As you continue to move towards the right, you will see that electrolysis is the cleanest production system because there are no methane associated with it. But depending on how you are powering the electrolyzer, the cost of the hydrogen starts to increase. So if you have a electrolyzer that's operating 24/7 attached to a nuclear power plant, for example, which is the pink portion in it, the cost is estimated to be about $4.2 per kilogram. But if you have renewables and you're not using it all the time, you just keep turning it off and on, then the cost starts to increase in up to $15 per kilogram of hydrogen. So this is really important because from an electrolyzer perspective, the two factors that affect the cost of hydrogen is the cost of the electrolyzer and the cost of electricity. Next slide. Okay, let's talk about hydrogen and transportation. Next one, please. Why talking about this? Right now, transportation is the biggest emitter in the US, with about 28% of the emissions coming from transportation. If you look on the right side and you kind of disaggregate the transportation sector into different type of vehicles, you will see that the light duty trucks and medium and heavy duty vehicles are the most polluting vehicles in the US, followed closely by passenger vehicles. So that is why people are talking about batteries and hydrogen for transportation, because this is one of the hardest sectors to decarbonize, depending on the different type of applications you're looking into. Next slide. And because this is a problem, not only in the US, but everywhere else, there's a lot of policy coming on trying to phase out the sales of new diesel trucks and vehicles in general, and trying to force the sales of zero-emitting vehicles starting at different points in time. And by these zero-emitting emission vehicles, you will have to think about both batteries and hydrogen fuel cells, which each one has the best application depending on the system you're looking into. Next slide. I like this chart because it shows, if you think about heavy duty, medium heavy duty, and light trucks are the most polluting vehicles in the US. And you can see in here the sales of these vehicles for the last 3 years or 4 years. Light duty trucks are the most or the highest selling vehicles in the US, followed by cargo vans, and then heavy duty trucks and medium duty trucks. So these technologies or these vehicles need to find the right technology to decarbonize to achieve the goals. Next one. And this graphic shows what seems to be the best application for what type of technology to decarbonize transportation. So passenger vehicles and small vehicles that have a usually shorter driving distance per day and doesn't have any cargo penalties, and they're light vehicles, are best suited to be decarbonized with batteries. As you continue to increase the distance that these vehicles drive, and if you consider that these are vehicles used for transportation of freight, and there can be a penalty because of the loss of payload, hydrogen start to become a more attractive solution depending on the case. There's a lot of caveats to this graphic. So the main key point that you have to think about is how far do you drive? What is it that you carry? And are you penalized by stopping to refuel? And if you lose a lot of time in that process, how that affects your economics? And then with those things in mind, you will start having some ideas of how to assess which technology would be best for you for decarbonization, either batteries or hydrogen. Next one. Well, and I started saying this already. So when you think about how to assess which technology will work best for you, there's two things that affect the total cost of ownership. One is the cost of the vehicle itself. Second is the cost of operating the vehicle, mainly fuel and insurance, all that kind of stuff, and the maintenance requirement for it. Right now, diesel is a lot cheaper than battery and hydrogen fuel cells, but when you look over the long term in terms of maintenance and fuel, there is a break-even point that you can reach with hydrogen batteries that over time it becomes a lot more cost-effective and cleaner to use any of these systems. And I'm gonna show, I think, the next one. Can you run this one, please? So like I said, upfront cost of the vehicle is one of the parameters that will affect your TCO. In this chart shows existing cost of vehicles depending on the powertrain. This would be the cheapest, followed by batteries, and then hydrogen fuel cells. I will not pay a lot of attention on hydrogen internal combustion engines because those are not as efficient in terms of fuel fuel standards, but they're still being developed as a transition in technology while fuel cells achieve more maturity. And then as you go over time, you will see that diesel will most likely start to become more expensive because of the fuel standards by EPA and others. And then the engine itself is going to be more expensive to develop, while batteries and fuel cells achieve a better economies of scale that achieve a lower cost of a vehicle. Just the next one. And as mentioned before, a payload might be an issue for some of the fleet operators. So right now, when you compare to the incumbent, which is diesel, hydrogen fuel cell heavy-duty trucks, Class 8 in particular for this chart, are are competitive in terms of payload and the penalty associated with the new system on board. Batteries, because of the current state of the technology, the longer you want to drive the truck, the bigger the battery and the heavier it is. So right now, a battery has a better case for shorter routes, but as technology develops and battery manufacturers start to pack more energy in more compact systems, batteries will have a good chance to achieve longer ranges. Most of them are looking into the 500-mile range. However, hydrogen on the other side, what will affect the payload is mainly how much hydrogen you can store, right? If you want to go long, you will require a lot more hydrogen storage on board. And current vehicles are already at par with about 300 and 500 mile range. And it's expected that as hydrogen tanks become lighter and hydrogen fuel cells become more energy dense, this payload is going to increase too. Next one. With those two things in mind, the cost of the vehicle, the OEM requirements, and the payload, I want to show results from an analysis by the National Renewable Energy Lab that tried to look into when these technologies would be cost effective with diesel. So in the left side of the chart, you will see energy share, and we'll see ranges of distance. What this portion of the chart shows is for this vehicle in particular, what is the main use and what is the energy or fuel associated with that utilization. So for medium duty is used mainly as short distance system, 10% of the energy share of the overall heavy duty and medium duty vehicles. And results show that batteries would be cost competitive between before 2030 for shorter routes. As you start increasing the route, the length of the route, and how you operate the vehicle again, what is your payload? Are you penalized by a non-productive time while you're recharging or refueling the vehicle? Then hydrogen starts to become cost competitive. So up to 500 miles, battery and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles will be cost competitive, with diesel starting 2030, 2032, I think. Next one. Similar for heavy duty vehicles, shorter routes will be at parity with batteries closer to 2030. When you start increasing the routes and the length of the driving distance you are using these vehicles, fuel cell achieve parity faster than battery electric vehicles. Again, these TCOs and these analyses are really depending on the input you put in them, meaning the cost of the vehicle, the cost of the fuel, if you are penalized by payload, and if you are penalized by charging or refueling times. And different inputs will yield you different results. But I think that the importance of these charts is that the technology is being developed and is not that far out before they become cost competitive with diesel. So it is good to start looking into the alternative right now so you can start planning your transition towards this type of vehicles. This one. Okay, finally, hydrogen hubs. For those of you that are not really familiar with this thing, I just tried to put one slide kind of overview of the hubs. In the Infrastructure and Jobs Act that was passed in 2021, and then became a part of the infrastructure law, the government set out $9.5 billion to fund hydrogen development in the US. Of those $9.5 billion, $8 billion were assigned to develop at least 4 regional hydrogen hubs. DOE was tasked to develop the grant program and to manage it, and they were required to release the request for proposals last year. And once the proposal were received, they will have 1 year to award the grants. And you go to the next slide, please. So what is a hub? A hub is the full value chain. Like I mentioned before, it has production, how you move hydrogen, and how you use it. But there is some considerations for that value chain. One, it has to be clean. And to define clean, the law defined that the hydrogen production could not have more than 2 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen produced. Later, after the law was passed, DOE and the EPA released standards for clean hydrogen, and they allow 4 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram of hydrogen produced. So that is the standard for clean hydrogen. No matter if you use electrolysis with renewables or nuclear, or you use a symmetry reforming with carbon capture, you have to meet this carbon intensity of production to be eligible for the grant. The second thing is you have to show the full value chain, right? You have to have balance of production and balance of utilization. So you cannot be short on demand or be short on supply. You have to be in a balanced system. Third is they are requiring to use renewable energy sources, nuclear energy sources, and natural gas. And finally, they want to see that the utilization includes transportation, power generation, and hydrogen for heating requirements in buildings and homes. And everything has to be enclosed in a network. There cannot be missing pieces, right? You have, even if you don't have the pipeline to move it, but you have trucks, you have a network connected between production and utilization, so you can establish the required infrastructure to kick off the market and enable potential for the scale up. Next slide. This is the timeline for the grant as it is right now. The request for proposals was, like I said, released last year. The hubs seeking for funding had to submit the application April 7th. It is expected that DOE will announce the awardees of the grant sometime in the fall, and then a negotiation process will start with each awardee in terms of what are the terms of the contract and the requirements that they need to comply throughout the process. Hopefully, the hubs will start operating in January 2024, and this grant will be managed in 4 phases. Phase 1 will be all the planning of the hub, is the conceptual designs, make sure that you have the technologies, make sure you have the demand, and then you have a plan to develop it. Phase 2 is procurement, supply chain, permitting, finalizing commercial agreements between supply and demand, and getting all the permits in place and all the procurement in place so you can start a construction. Phase 3 is the construction of the hub itself, of the infrastructure you need to produce, move, and use hydrogen. And phase 4 is the operations and ramp up. Each phase has a go no go decision between the hub and DOE, where the hub will present the progress made in that phase and the plan for the following phase. DOE will review this information and will either accept it as is, will require modifications to better comply with the plan, or will define that the hub does not have chance to succeed, and then we'll just stop the grant right there. The money that is expected to be granted in these awards are up to $1.25 billion per hub. That has to be matched in a 50-50 ratio, meaning for every dollar that the DOE gives the hub needs to invest at least $1. So effectively, if a hub is awarded 1.25 billion, the total investment in the hub would be 2.5 billion or more. And finally, the funds will be disbursed by phase. So planning will have a chunk of money. Additional disbursement will be for phase 2. The biggest disbursement is expected to be for construction, because it's when you're actually deploying infrastructure, and then operations should be the less capital intensive. Next one. Dominion is partnered with all these other companies that you can see on the right in the Mid-Atlantic Hub. The Mid-Atlantic Hub submitted an application, submitted a concept paper last year, was encouraged to submit application. We submitted the application in April this year, and we received some comments by DOE and to kind of provide additional information on the application. We answered those comments, and now are waiting for the next steps in the process. This hub started even before the DOE program and the Infrastructure Jobs Act came out. Connected DMV has been leading the effort in Virginia, DC, and Maryland, which is the geographic footprint of the hub, to develop a plan to deploy hydrogen infrastructure to decarbonize the hardest to decarbonize sectors, including industrial, power generation, and transportation. And you can see in here, this is not the actual proposal that we submitted, but this is the conceptual system that Connected DMV developed before the DOE funding came along, where they show where are the different clean energy resources, where are the different potential end uses that could use hydrogen, and how we could connect this via a network of pipelines. Again, this is not the application, this is not the proposal, this is just a conceptual design that was developed based on different interaction with different partners that are part of the coalition. Next slide. And this is sketching here is developed based on the DOE's Hydrogen at Scale program. And it shows, and it was adapted to show the regions, resources, and utilization that we have identified throughout the last 2 years of work in hydrogen, right? So we have renewables, we have nuclear, we have RNG. that can be used as an energy input to produce hydrogen from electrolysis mainly. And then from that, we have the how to move the hydrogen via trucks, via potential pipelines that will be down the road in terms of timeline. And then all the end users that we have identified from engaging different stakeholders. So you have a lot of transportation, a lot of industrial, and some buildings requirements too. Next one. During that assessment that we that connected NVD before the hub application came up, they had identified the different or the biggest potential consumers of hydrogen in the region, and the potential demand by 2030 if we were to start 2 years ago developing the market, right? We haven't started like full on in developing all these projects. We're still in the phase of identification of stakeholders, identification of potential end users, trying to understand what is the actual end use, what is it that has been trying to decarbonize, so we can better understand how much hydrogen that is, how do you need the hydrogen in the river, how would you use it, and what are your sensitivities around prices, technologies, or environmental attributes that you need to achieve. So we are still in the planning phase. Even though we submitted already the application, we are still engaging with interested parties to better understand what is it that they are trying to achieve with hydrogen and how we can support that, either as part of the hub or as a business proposition by any of the parties that are involved in the coalition. Next one. And this is a cool map because it shows all the known coalitions that submitted application to get money from DOE. So you can see in there, in Virginia, DC, and Maryland, this is the Mid-Atlantic Hub. There were 74 concept papers that were submitted. From those, 33 coalitions were encouraged to apply. And from those, at least known 20 applications were received at DOE. So as the process continues, some coalitions start to fall short or just remove themselves because they're not achieving the financials and technical feasibility that they require for this. And it's expected that DOE, once the evaluation process is complete, they will grant about 10, up to 10 hubs for the phase one of the grant. And then from that, they will probably continue to cut the number of recipients so the most potentially successful hubs can move forward throughout the 4 phases. Next one. I think that's it, right? Yes. Well, so thank you for the time for listening to me. Hopefully this was interesting and helpful for you guys, and open for any questions. Sarah, back to you.
Yeah. So thanks everyone, and thanks Gio for that great presentation. I think in addition to a good hydrogen overview, I think it also provided a good overview of how some of these big funding projects from DOE progress and how those applications get awarded. So we're going to go ahead and move into questions now. I'd like to encourage people to either continue to put them in the chat, or if you want to come off mute, please put your hand up and I will call on people. So I will go ahead and start with one of our chat questions. So could you go into detail a little bit more about the safety of hydrogen as a fuel as opposed to some other fuel sources that we have?
Sure. So in terms of safety, I guess for transportation specifically, the most critical part will be the tank. So these tanks are being tested. They have been validated to be crash worthy, so they won't blow out immediately. And they are in nature similar to CNG tanks. There's some different considerations because of the type of gas that they contain. It's hydrogen, so it tends to react with some materials. It's tiny, so it tends to leak. So these tanks are under rigorous testing before they come out to market. So In terms of the tank about to blow out because of hydrogen and how explosive it can be, I mean, I will not say this it will never happen, but the safety of it is comparable with the safety of diesel or CNG tanks. There's has not been reported accidents with these tanks just exploding out of nowhere or in crashes even. So that part I think is still continue to be worked on by manufacturers. They are working with carbon composites to increase strength of the material and increase safety of it. There are safety standards for fueling at refueling stations, and these are mainly well developed for passenger vehicles and medium duty vehicles. Heavy duty trucks are still under development, and the reason for that is because in order to be competitive with diesel, you will want to refuel as quick as possible, right? And there are some physical things with hydrogen when you are fueling that you cannot fuel as fast right now as you will do or you will want to do. So there's still some research being done, and there's a bunch of coalitions working together on these systems, and it's expected that in the next year or two there will be commercially available heavy duty high throughput fueling stations that will be able to achieve the same times as diesel, and then the safety associated with it will be validated by the standards that regulate the fueling stations.
I think that's a great answer. I'll also just note that hydrogen is a commercial fuel out in parts of California right now. There are individual owners of light duty hydrogen vehicles. Toyota has had a vehicle called the Hydrogen Mirai that has been on the market for a couple of years now. And there are hydrogen fueling stations that individuals can just pull up to and refuel their vehicle. So it has been tested and it is safe. And as Gio said, we're moving up to scaling that up to medium and heavy duty. So thank you. That is a great answer.
Yeah, there's actually about 10,000 Mirai or hydrogen fuel cell vehicles in California, besides the commercial vehicles, mainly buses and medium duty.
Yep. And California, not California, parts of Canada also have some not charging, hydrogen fueling networks going. So it is an application that is currently being used by thousands of people. So great question. The next question that we got is, you mentioned the cost comparisons between gray, blue, and green hydrogen takes into account a carbon tax. How much of the carbon tax did you estimate in the analysis? And was green hydrogen competitive with gray or blue without those carbon taxes? And I can bring the slides back up if that's helpful.
Yeah, if you will, please. First, that's a great question. That was not my analysis. I wish it was. I sourced the reference the source in the slide. But what is usually used for carbon tax is the social cost of carbon, right? And EPA, I think, has $50 per ton of CO2 as a potential carbon tax. That is most of the analytical models input with that. There are also the existing carbon trading mechanisms like cap and trade or carbon taxes that have been proposed in RGGI, for example, the regional greenhouse initiative that Virginia just decided to pull out. So I'm not really sure about, and I think it was the previous one. I'm not sure about the carbon tax that was a model in this one. I will have to go back to McKinsey, and the source is public, so you guys can look into that more detail. But I will assume that these include both the social cost of carbon plus some inputs from existing carbon trading systems that are in Europe and the US to get to an average cost of carbon that will be acceptable, let's say, by different governments.
And you also made a great point. I normally make it a point to remind everyone. We are recording this session, so it'll be available for you guys to view after the fact. It'll take a couple of days for me to get it turned around. But we'll also be sending out a copy of Gio's slides. And in that lower left-hand corner, he has linked the sources for all of these. So you guys will have direct access to that here in a couple of days. So we got another question, and I think it's good that I pulled the slides back up, that says, can you discuss the statistics of usage of hydrogen in every sector industry? You did go over that a little bit, so I'll start moving back down, but every industry from power plants to generation, hydrogens, etc. Let's see.
Can you repeat the question again, please?
Yes. Can you discuss sorry, I'm hitting tongue twisters today. Can you discuss statistics of usage of hydrogen in every sector, such as industry, transportation, power plants, power generation, etc.?
Okay, so each sector is a different state of development. I will say potentially transportation is the one that has developed the most so far. Because the technologies are being developed for a while now. So fuel cells have been funded by the US government in Europe and China for a while now. So they have achieved some maturity already in the manufacturing, and they are available commercially right now, similar with the tanks for transportation. So I think transportation has right now the biggest role or the biggest market share in the US in terms of hydrogen demand. I would say followed by most likely, I would say some commercial applications that use hydrogen for heating requirements. So there are several blending projects in gas distribution companies like Dominion that are are actually piloting blending 5% of hydrogen by volume in the gas distribution system to validate safety and compatibility of materials and performance of appliances using these blends. And this has been going for a while in the US and a lot more in Europe. They achieved the milestone of 20% blend in the gas distribution system in a small town. So I think that combustion in appliances and small equipment would be the other one that is getting a lot of demand because it's enabled by the infrastructure in place. Then after that, I would say power generation probably in terms of technology development. There's at least 4 turbine manufacturers that are working really hard on developing turbines that can burn hydrogen for power generation. I think right now they are working on blends of up to 40% by volume of hydrogen with natural gas, working towards 100% by 2035 is their goal. And you also have smaller systems like fuel cells and other reciprocating engines that can burn on blends of hydrogen for smaller applications like, let's say, your backup power, or like you want to have your on-site generation system with natural gas and you instead run with blends of hydrogen or 100% hydrogen. I think the last one is just industrial application. It's just such a diverse market segment, and there's such a different constraints in terms of technologies that is going to be longer time to be widespread. I would say steel manufacturing probably is the one that is closest to have something working for hydrogen in terms of both reducing the iron ore and using hydrogen for heating requirements to melt the iron into steel. I hope that answers the question.
I hope so too. I think it would have from my perspective, but if you ask that question, you have follow-ups, please put them in the chat. Thank you for that overview. I think it's a great breakdown. Another question that we received is, how does the US compare to the rest of the world in production/use of green hydrogen?
Ooh. If you remember the chart that I showed at the very beginning, I think it had the US natural. I mean, we're not using, and we're not making enough green hydrogen. Let's put it that way. All of the hydrogen that we produce is mainly from natural gas reformation. That one,
Okay.
the one before, after.
There we go. Okay.
There you go. You see, electrolysis, which is the green hydrogen for this case, is just nascent. I would say Europe is probably the region that has most projects announced for at-scale hydrogen production through electrolysis using renewables. There's a lot of offshore wind that is being dedicated for hydrogen production because they have a different challenge, which is energy security and their reliance on natural gas from Russia. So they are rushing to get away from that. So they have a different motive to go faster in this process. And they are using for energy. The US is still behind in terms of use of energy as of hydrogen as an energy carrier. But I think that with all the incentives coming from the bipartisan law and the Inflation Reduction Act, there's going to be a spark in demand for hydrogen because a lot of European companies have subsidiaries in the US and they are required to meet the same goals as Europe. So those are the companies that we have been talking to for this hubs effort, and that they are really serious about we need to decarbonize. While we cannot electrify, we are looking into hydrogen. And those are the use cases that I mentioned before. So yeah, we're not making enough hydrogen, green hydrogen on this.
Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and ask a couple of questions that were submitted to us at the beginning when people registered. But please continue to use the chat, or like I said, use that hand raise option, and you can also ask your questions directly. So you did cover a lot of Dominion's plans with those hubs. Are there any other projects or demonstrations that Dominion might have planned in the hydrogen space?
We have you know, you guys are familiar with Dominion. Dominion has gas distribution businesses in Utah, Ohio, North Carolina, and South Carolina. In electric services in Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. We have a hydrogen blending pilot program in Utah, Ohio, and North Carolina. The one in Utah is the most advanced right now. They are already blending hydrogen in the gas distribution system in a small town in Utah. Ohio is blending hydrogen in the training center, which is our facility that has kind of mock-up houses with appliances and stuff, so we can test it. And North Carolina is in the planning phase. In addition to that, we are looking at hydrogen for power generation. There's no public announcements on that, but the company is looking into this to different resources and partnerships that we have in place. And we are also looking at hydrogen for our customers. If you remember the net zero slide that we have in there, that includes our operations and our customers' operations, right? So it's how we produce electricity, how we move it, and how they use it, or how we get natural gas and how our customers use it. So the use of natural gas by our customers or the emissions from their operations will affect to some extent our net zero goals. So we are trying to partner with our customers to figure out exactly how they operate and how we can help them decarbonize their operations so we can get to that net zero goal.
Excellent. Sounds like you have some great projects going. And I honestly think that a lot of the other questions that we had submitted prior to the event were already answered in the presentation and other questions. So I'll give everyone another chance to submit any additional questions that you might have. And then we'll go from there. A quick second. All right, and I will fill this time by letting everyone know again that I will be sending out a copy of the video and the slides. Hopefully I'll get that out to you guys sometime next week. It typically takes about a week to turn around a video, cut those dead ends off both ends, and then get it all uploaded and sent out. So if you registered, we already have your email address to share that with you. So you'll be getting that in the next week or so. I really want to thank Gio for the great presentation. A lot of information shared today, and a very quick and efficient speaker. So we'll actually end a little bit early here today. So I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who joined us today, and submitted your questions. Very appreciative of the conversation. And thank you all again for joining. So with that, I'll give it one last pause to see if anyone has anything else they want to share. All right, and with that, I think we can end about 10 minutes early. Oh, wait, we did get one more question, so I'm glad I sort of waited. Okay, so all right, here we go. What type of costs are included in the global cost sheet of hydrogen, and how do you estimate the total costs? Are there any formulas that you're aware of for those types of calculations?
Yeah, so the cost of hydrogen, I mean, when you're trying to do the total cost of ownership, I mean, assuming that's what the question is it had to, like the TCO for the vehicles, right? So when you're looking into that, you will have to see the cost of vehicles. Right now it's about 600K for hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, although there is some rebates. I think it's up to 40K in the IRA for new vehicles. So that's one portion that you will have to estimate, depending, and that's for class A, the one I just said. In terms of the cost of hydrogen, is really, really dependent on the production pathway and the scale at which it's produced. I would say if you are not so worried about where the hydrogen is coming from, the cost can be at the pump, varying, and this is data from California mainly. It can change between $8 per kilogram up to $16 per kilogram when there are like shortages. And that's because the hydrogen ecosystem is not developed yet, right? Through this hub application and with the IRA, it is expected that the cost of hydrogen can be as low as 5 in the initial phases, or $6 per kilogram, and that affects directly how you will model your system, right? Because you will compare what is the cost of diesel and what is the fuel efficiency of that diesel, and then you will use the same analysis to do the cost of hydrogen and the fuel efficiency of the hydrogen, how many miles per kilogram or gallons of diesel you can drive to estimate what your utilization or your operation cost. From the maintenance perspective, you won't have to service the truck the same way because it's an electric powertrain. So the maintenance requirements are a lot less than the diesel engine. And the lifetime of the fuel cells is about, I want to say 8,000 hours is what they're saying, that you will need to use the fuel cell before you have to do some stack replacement or anything like it. So less moving parts, less maintenance. So those are the main factors that you have to use as input for your model. There are online TCO calculators that you can use to compare between diesel and batteries and hydrogen fuel cells to give you an idea of how cost competitive each one is with diesel. And I'm hoping I understood the question right. If not, please feel free to speak.
Yes, feel free to unmute yourself or to put in the chat. So once again, appreciate everyone taking their time today. Gio, thank you so much for your presentation, and thank you to everyone who brought questions. And we'll see you all next time. Have a great day, everyone.